One Greg Cosell at this time from NFL Films, joining us here as he does every week to break down Colts and Bills, as he'll undoubtedly be doing on on the matchup show on ESPN.
Gentlemen, what's happening?
How you doing,
Not
man?
too much, just getting ready for a wild card game here at home for the first time
in Buffalo.
Yeah, for the first time in 25 years. Nothing new. So,
just normal stuff.
Right. So, Greg, we were just talking about this earlier in our show here about how the Colts do a pretty good job of getting off to fast starts. 66 of their 107 first quarter points this season scored on their opening possessions. Just your take on how you feel about Frank Reich as an opening game play scripter.
Well, it's funny you asked that because I think they've changed a bit over the course of this season, Chris. I think that they've become much more focused on running the football.
Right.
And I think that you've seen them over the last number of weeks start series with Jonathan Taylor having 6 or 7 runs on the first series. And they did not do that early in the season. Taylor has sort of become a foundation runner for them over the last 6-7 weeks. So they've actually changed their approach. So I think that's something you have to be aware of. I think there's a definite burden on the interior of the Bills defense in this game, particularly early on, because that's the foundation and the basis of what they do with the run game in Indianapolis. It's a lot of inside zone. Taylor's kind of a between the tackles runner. He's very good at it. I mean, I loved him coming out of Wisconsin. I thought he was the best runner in the draft. Now I think he's gotten his sea legs, as it were, in the NFL. He's a decisive, competitive downhill runner. He doesn't hesitate. He sees it. He hits it. He does have some explosive ability to take it to the house. I wouldn't say he's loose-hipped and shifty, but he can make second and third level defenders miss. So I think it starts more with him now than it did through the first 9 or 10 weeks of the season.
We've talked a lot about how good their offensive line has been, particularly guard to guard. Now they've had to replace both tackles in the last week or two, but guard to guard, those guys seem to be from where we're at in Buffalo really good, and that's one of the reasons they run it so well is because of the athleticism and the physicality down inside. How have they been since they've had to switch out their tackles?
Well, it's funny you say that, Steve, because I thought for much of this season, their O-line was not as good overall as it had been a year ago. And, sometimes a good back then, as you know, can really start to help your O-line get better. And I think as Taylor kind of figured it out, I think their O-line and their entire run game has gotten better. So clearly Quentin Nelson at his best is a top guard in the league. Kelly, the center, is a good player. They've played, other than left tackle, where I know Costanzo's out for the year, so he's not going to be the left tackle. But other than that, their O-line has pretty much been the same group all season, and even going back to last season. So it's a group that knows one another well. There's cohesion there. And I guess what I'm very anxious to see, and I don't know if you guys have spoken about this at all, I'm very anxious to see the approach that Frank Reich takes. I'm not a big believer, and it's just me, reasonable people can disagree. I'm not necessarily a big believer in, let's keep Josh Allen on the sideline for this reason. Even if you try to do that, the Bills will still get 9 or 10 possessions. And assuming that everything goes as we've seen over the last 10 weeks, if the Bills score 4 touchdowns, let's say, in those possessions, you still have to score if you're Indianapolis. So, I think you have to have a mix. You can't just say, let's run the ball and keep Josh Allen and the Bills offense on the sideline. You have to score, and you have to score touchdowns.
For the Colts offense, Greg, interesting that more than a quarter of the time, they're in 2 and 3 tight end sets. 27% of the time, they're in 12 or 13 personnel. And they use their screen game a great deal, and the tight ends are a part of that as well. So what would you say the defenses this season have done to at least try to slow down their effectiveness in the screen game, if anything?
Well, let me answer that a little differently if I could, Chris. I think that the 12 personnel and the multiple tight ends, I think they had a stretch this season where T.Y. Hilton was in and out of the lineup.
Correct.
Again, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but just my sense, and someone can check this, and maybe I'm wrong. I'm just going by the eyeball test of watching their tape over the last month or so since T.Y. Hilton has become a much bigger factor in their offense.
Yeah, more 11.
I think they've been in a little more 11 personnel
Yep.
recently because Hilton's back is a big factor. Pascal is one of those receivers, no one hears about. He'll play in the league 10 years, and he always lines up and plays. And Michael Pittman, to me, is going to be a great player. So, I think that, yes, they'll mix in 12. They do have a very good screen game, and they use their screen game with tight ends as well. It's not just backs. But Nyheim Hines is a big factor in their screen game, too. He'll come in on third down. He was playing more snaps earlier in the season before Taylor became the foundation guy, but he's a terrific receiver. And we'll see. This might be a game where they say, you know what, let's play him a few more snaps because maybe we feel good about a matchup. Because we've seen Hines line up detached from the formation because he can run wide receiver routes.
What does this look like from your perspective? If you've got the weapons that the Colts have now with the health of their wide receivers, Pascal, T.Y. Hilton, and Pittman, how do you look? What's your view of the Bills' defense if you're going to attack it?
Well, I think that, number one, it will start with the run game, and I think the interior of the Bills' D-line has to play well. Because, as I said, Taylor's going to run between the tackles for the most part. So it has to start there. And then when you get to the pass game, they move T.Y. Hilton around. I'm assuming that the Bills will do what they've essentially done all year, which is played Tre'Davious White as the boundary corner. He's really not been a matchup corner this season. He's almost exclusively played the boundary corner, which means I assume Wallace/Norman gets the field corner position. I think that's where you'd probably look to attack if you're Indianapolis. You'd look to make Wallace or Norman have to cover. And then, their tight ends they're not big factors in terms of explosive plays. I think they're more of sustaining players. Although Mo Alley-Cox does have ability to be a seam threat, much more so than Doyle.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, though. They're more of a keep your offense on schedule type factors in the passing game at the tight end position more than anything else. Let's flip it around to the defensive side, Greg, and we'll get to DeForest Buckner in a second. But with respect to their secondary, we know Rock Yassin is out for this game. That's certainly a loss for them. There are some in Indy who believe that Kenny Moore, the nickel guy, is their best matchup corner. Could you see them maybe trying to put more on Diggs? I mean, we're assuming Diggs is going to suit up and play. I think Beasley is more of a question mark. How do you see them handling their matchups back there, especially knowing that Rock Yassin is out?
Well, unless they go totally away from what they've done all season, they're going to line up versus multiple wide receivers, meaning 3 or 4. We'll get to the 4 in a minute. But when it's 11 personnel for the Bills, they're going to line up Rhodes at the boundary corner, Carey at the field corner, and Moore in the slot. And unless they do something totally dramatic. They're not a high percentage man-to-man defense. They play a lot of zone. So they're not a pure matchup defense. I think the weak link, and even when Yassin played, he struggled through much of the year. I think the weak link would be viewed as the field corner with Carey. And that's where you might look to see the Bills try to go. I love Kenny Moore. I think he's a really good slot corner, one of the best in the league, because not only is he a good coverage player, but he can blitz. And they're not a high percentage blitz team. They're a selective blitz team. But, that's the way they line up. The question for me arises when the Bills go with 4 wide. And even if Beasley can't play, they still have 4 wide receivers they can put out there. So the Colts have only played 6 snaps all year of dime with 6 defensive backs. So they are a nickel sub defense. So if the Bills put out 4 wide, to me, it probably pretty much tells the Bills that the Colts are going to be in zone. And they'll know that going in. So I'm very curious to see that matchup.
How have the Bills played against zone? Just say it.
I think that they've been better, but I think they've been really good against man. So we'll see how that plays out. But I mean, they've been really, really good against man, in my view. I don't have numbers right in front of me, but I can just see a lot of throws by Josh versus man. But he's made some much, much better throws against zone through the second half of this season in this stretch where he's played really, really well.
So you can look at, for me, the way I see it too, and if they're going to play zone like that, you can expect Josh Allen to be throwing a lot of hitch routes to vacant areas in the zone, guys catching it, going down right away or getting tackled right away, and just moving down the football field like that. Once in a while, they may scheme a guy with a chance to go deep. Certainly, they'll be running guys through the middle of that zone, trying to spread that out. But to me, that's what this game looks like. Josh Allen out of shotgun and plinking balls into a 7 or 8 yard window with Cole Beasley turning around and facing him, or Diggs facing him, or whoever. And that's kind of what it's going to look like in the passing game.
Yeah, and to me, it comes down to Josh, and he's done this really well over the last month or so, being patient. I think that's one area in which he's improved dramatically, being patient instead of trying to force balls that aren't there. See, man is easier because it's man. It's, hey, you got him, and there's the matchup I like. Zone is a little different. So you've got to be patient. You can't try to push it when it's not there. Depends on down and distance. Obviously, there are times you do have to try to make a stick throw into a tight window, but you don't want to do that on 1st and 10. It's not necessary. So we'll see. Obviously, they just played a team that played a lot of man and blitzed a lot, and I think that they're really good against man coverage. But zone is a little bit of a different animal, and you really got to be patient, and you've got to let it happen a little bit. I hate the phrase "take what the defense gives," but in some ways, it does apply.
Buckner is obviously the linchpin up front for them. I know he's nursing an ankle injury, but everybody's expecting him to play. And he kind of generates a lot of their pass rush from the interior. Talking to some guys that cover the Colts, they say their edge rush just really hasn't been up to snuff this year, especially when just rushing the front four.
Yeah.
I got to believe that's not a good matchup with a quarterback like Allen who rolls away from that pressure all the time and makes plays on the move. How do you see that?
Well, the strange thing is you're right about the edge pressure, but they have pretty good players. So I think you have to be careful. I mean, Justin Houston can win. Now, I don't know if he's the same player he was, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, but he can win. Muhammad's a fascinating player. He's very athletic. He can bend. Over the last 3-4 weeks, they've gotten back a player who I really liked coming out of college in his second year, Kamiko Toure. He's been getting meaningful snaps over the last 3-4 games. So they've got players who are capable. Now, what they normally do, they, in a sense, have two nickel fronts, depending on down and distance. If it's a long yardage situation, they'll bring Danico Autry inside with Buckner. And on the outside, it will be Houston and Muhammad with Toure getting some snaps. If it's 1st and 10, they might have Grover Stewart in there next to Buckner. And Grover Stewart's had a really, really good year, but he's not a pass rusher. So this might not be a game in which Grover Stewart gets a lot of snaps, as good a player as he is.
Yeah, this is a team that they're 11 win. It's amazing. They're 11-win team as a 7 seed, which they would not have made the playoffs at 11-5 a year ago. It's an amazing season, an amazing point where this is the situation you're in. But still, what do you see in Phillip Rivers? That's the last question I'm going to ask you about the Colts, and we'll move on to these other matchups. About Phillip Rivers, where he's at in his career, how he's looked, and how the Colts are using his skill set.
Yeah, I mean, I think over the last number of weeks, he hasn't thrown as much because they've been able to run the ball really effectively. Obviously, the number of the opponents they played over the last number of weeks, I think with the exception maybe of Pittsburgh, they have not been great run defenses. And I think that's allowed them to be able to run the ball both with volume and with success. So Rivers has not had to throw it as much. But look, Rivers has done this a long time, Steve. You know that. There's a lot of people that think, oh, he throws a lot of picks. He really doesn't if you look at his career. But, he's not. He's a guy I wouldn't count out. If they have to throw it, and again, that's a relative term, have to throw it, I think he's capable. Now, obviously, they don't want to be down 21-0 early in the second quarter. But if the game turns out to have a shootout feel to it, I think Rivers is capable.
Moving on to the other games here on Wild Card Weekend, Greg, the one that I'm most interested in watching is the Rock'em Sock'em football that could resemble the 1970s, at least in part, between the Titans and the Ravens. I mean, these are two teams that are just going to beat the tar out of each other, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Little old school football. You got to bring your big boy pants for this one.
Yeah.
I mean, these teams played week 11, and in that game, the Titans on offense lined up in some form of base personnel, meaning 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends, or a fullback on 75% of their offensive snaps, which is unheard of in today's NFL. I mean, and they kept the Ravens in their base defense. And, of course, we know about the Ravens' run game. They've averaged 267 yards rushing in this 5-game winning streak. Those are college numbers. Now, the run games are totally different. The Titans line up and say, here we come with King Henry, and the Ravens is highly schemed. So they're 2 totally different run games.
Yeah, the running joke around here is that this game's going to take about, 2.5 hours to play in real time because it's going to be a running clock. There's, no incomplete passes, and they're just going to run it that way. What do you think? Who's the better team?
This is a tough game, to predict. I'm not good at the prediction business, Steve. I mean, the way that Baltimore's playing offensively right now, and Tennessee's had some defensive issues throughout the year, and a lot of people believe, and the tape tells you that could be their downfall in the playoffs, is they're just not very good defensively. Now, they try to camouflage that and compensate for it with the fact that they can control the pace and tempo of games. But as I said, the other team still gets the ball, and the Titans give up a lot of points.
Looking at some of the other ones, the interesting divisional tilt between the Seahawks and the Rams. The Rams are kind of in a tough spot here because we don't know what the health of Goff's thumb is and how effective he's going to be throwing the football. It's a mystery. But they always play the Seahawks tough, even up there in Seattle.
Yes.
So how much could Goff impact this game, good or bad, for the Rams?
Well, yeah, it's almost impossible to know, number one, if he's going to play. I mean, it's funny. I remember at the Combine, everybody said, oh, he's got small hands. Well, this might be a case where the small hands matter because if his thumb's not in great shape, maybe he can't grip the ball well.
Yeah.
But I would look at the other side. Russell Wilson has not played well at all over the last month, 6 weeks. This is an offense, to me, that's kind of trying to figure out what they are right now. They started the season with let Russ cook. He was great for 6-7 weeks. Then he started not playing very well. I mean, think about this. DK Metcalf has not had a 20-plus yard reception in the last 4 games. Think about that. They have no big play offense over the last month or so. And this is a very, very difficult defense to play against.
What do you see happening in the Pittsburgh-Cleveland game? They just played last week. Cleveland barely snuck out a win. They had Mason Rudolph at quarterback for the Steelers. This seems to – and now Stefanski's not going to be there. Their head coach is down. Is this just a kind of a sad end to a Cleveland Browns year that they had a little bit more higher hopes for?
I don't know. I mean, that's why they play them, Steve, as you well know. I think that if you look at Cleveland, I think the issue with a different play caller doesn't come in your normal down and distance situations because they have a philosophy. They're not going to step away from the philosophy. I think the issue potentially arises in more of those critical down and distance situations, the 3rd and 8s, if you get in the red zone, because I'm sure Baker Mayfield has a really good feel for what Kevin Stefanski would call. Maybe, unless Alex Van Pelt just does it by cookie cutter and goes by the same exact sheet. But if he doesn't, he's certainly not going to have the same feel with Alex Van Pelt as Stefanski. So, to me, it's those critical situations which could be a factor.
Greg, we thank you for the time. Thanks for breaking it down. We know you're busy. Get that phone call for you, and we'll watch you on the matchup show this weekend.
That, guys,
No worries. Thanks, Greg. See you later, man.
All right, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks.